Before I begin my actual message of the homily, just one thing to remind many of us, I think, who may know this, but then perhaps a new insight for some of you about a way to enrich your own prayerful participation in the Mass is that in this gospel, which is John 20, verses 19 to 31, Thomas's proclamation when his doubts are rolled away, you might say. When he says, "My Lord and my God," in Catholic culture and tradition, that's one phrase that we're all invited to pray at the elevation. So that's the time when the priest, as the consecration is taking place, and the bread is undergoing its transubstantiation, right, to become Christ present to us, and then the same with the wine, as God transubstantiate it to become the blood of Christ. When the priest raises the host, the Blessed Sacrament, and then a few minutes later raises the chalice, it goes, I don't know how far back it goes, but there has been a culture, and it still exists really, for any one of you, just quietly to yourself or just even mentally, silently, but to pray, "My Lord and my God," recognizing Christ now present in the transformed and, technically speaking, transubstantiated bread that is now his body, and the wine that is now the blood of Christ. Also keeping in mind that in the Blessed Sacrament, the host, the consecrated bread, if you will, Christ is fully present, body, blood, soul, and divinity. So just, keep that in mind also. We are receiving the blood of Christ in that sense when we receive the host. What I want to talk about mostly, though, for the homily itself is Thomas a little bit and his experience of Jesus dealing with him, if you would put it that way. But to put it in a larger context, as this Sunday is Divine Mercy Sunday, I want to propose and suggest that one form of mercy that God shows us and that we can then embody and put into practice with one another is God's being very purposeful and deliberate, Father, Son, and Spirit, of how they understand each of us, our own temperament, personality, disposition, which are, more lasting and enduring elements of who we are, but then how things change in different seasons of our lives, different times of our lives, different circumstances and situations, attitudes, feelings, emotions, all those things that come and go, that at both levels, the things that endure in us and then things that change, God coming to us, revealing himself to us, dealing with us in a way that matches what's going on in our lives and the kind of person we are. He doesn't just have a kind of cookie-cutter approach where he deals with everybody the same way. I suggest this for we see in the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. Just 3 examples, well, 4 in a sense, but one is Mary Magdalene. Jesus appears to her when she's by herself, even within the variations of the divinely inspired recollections based on what Mary Magdalene would have told everybody. But it's appearing to her by herself. And Jesus comforts her, consoles her, and commissions her to go and tell the apostles what's happened. Then later, the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. They are leaving Jerusalem and going back to what we presume is their home village of Emmaus or town. They are discouraged. They are despondent. They are downcast. They are heartbroken that this Jesus has been crucified. He's died, tortured, that their hopes of this new thing God was doing seems to have just shattered. And Jesus, as we all know, right, appears to them, these 2, which some tradition speculation is that it was a married couple among the early followers of Jesus. And he appears to them and elicits from them their description of what had happened and how discouraged they are. Then when he appears to them, he gently corrects them. right? He does say, "Oh, you of little belief." That's a paraphrase. But, he says, didn't you understand that the Messiah had to suffer and so enter into his glory? So he then opens up for them the scriptures that point to him. Certainly probably the ultimate Bible study of having Jesus himself walk you through the scriptures to everything that pointed to him. So he goes to Mary Magdalene when she's alone. Then this couple, whether it's a married couple or just two disciples who were friends, discouraged, he appears to them with them together. Then we see this first appearance from John's gospel, the first half of this passage. He appears to all the disciples who were there, the apostles gathered in the upper room, but Thomas isn't with them. One might wonder, as I did, why didn't Jesus find Thomas wherever he was in Jerusalem, walking around? For whatever reason that Thomas was not with the other apostles, Jesus could easily have appeared to him by himself and gotten him to understand that he really has risen from the dead and the resurrection is true. And he could have helped Thomas overcome his fears and his doubts, I should say, without the other apostles around to heighten Thomas's sense of doubt. But Jesus waits, and waits till Thomas is come back and is with the other apostles before he appears again and deals with Thomas. But once again, in his love, but his wisdom, he's pretty sharp and direct with Thomas. He doesn't accommodate Thomas's doubts. He says, no longer be unbelieving, but believe. And I hope this isn't irreverent. Jesus calls Thomas his bluff. And he says, okay. All right. And of course, Thomas, how did he know what I said that, right? But still, he says, okay, you want to do it here. Here's the wound. I'm glorified in the resurrection, but I still have my wounds and my scars. And go ahead, Thomas. Put your finger, put your hand, and get your own empirical evidence. So here, I'm borrowing an idea from Bishop Robert Barron, and a Catholic leader of the church and a teacher and speaker, from his homily already online for this weekend. He suggests that it was with Thomas being in the community of faith, the seedbed of the church being the apostles gathered there in the upper room, and whoever else might have been with them. But within the community of faith, Jesus comes back and appears to Thomas and makes himself known and helps Thomas get free from his doubts. Jesus rolls away the stone of Thomas's doubts and his skeptical attitude. But it's within the context of the family of faith, the community of the church gathered. If Jesus did that some 2,000 years ago, right after the resurrection, that's how he still can and does make himself known to us. So I invite each of you, if you've never done this, pray and ask the Lord Jesus that he would, in a sense, accommodate your personality, your disposition, your way of thinking of things, and in your current particular circumstances and situations, that somehow Jesus in his wisdom and love and divine mercy might choose to reveal himself to you in some notable, discernible way. And yet, if you've never experienced something like that, and perhaps you may never experience that kind of really salient, you might say, notable, almost tangible experience of Jesus being real and being with you, to pray then for this blessing that Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and believed." In my experience of the Lord, I've had maybe one time when I would say it was almost tangible of the presence of God. I was in a chapel in South Bend, Indiana, the residents were the community, the brotherhood that I belonged to. The place we were living at the time had been a convent. And so we inherited the chapel from the nuns who had lived there. And one time I was praying, and just by myself in the chapel. And I would say literally, using the adverb correctly, right? I almost literally felt a big brotherly bear hug, like somebody is putting their arms around me and giving me a big brotherly bear hug. And I experienced that as being Jesus, right there, just letting me know that he's really there with me. I was almost like I could feel the clothes being pressed in. So that happened once. God just must have known that at that moment, I was probably in my mid to late 20s, I'm thinking, early 30s at the most. I must have needed that. And I got to say, you all know this, right? I'm going on 64 years old. Nothing like that has ever happened again. So I cherish that one time. And if you've never had anything like that, maybe God knows your faith is stronger and you don't need something like that, like I needed it. But I encourage you, I invite you to have a little courage. Pray for the Lord. If he thinks you need it, that he might sometime between now and your mortal death give you such an experience. But also I invite you to pray for others in your own family, among your friends or neighbors, whomever, co-workers, or if you're retired, whoever you hang out with. Pray that the Lord might accommodate them and come to them in some way that would make himself real to them. Maybe he would use you somehow to do that. But to pray that, like these post-resurrection appearances, Jesus might, if he so chooses, do so for you, make himself known to you in whatever circumstances you're facing, and to others that you care about. That indeed, we, as the end of this gospel passage, we may come to believe more fully that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that through this belief, we may grow ever more vital in having life in his name.